As we promised with the Zero to Hero, we've decided to do guides for every healer that we do. We started off with Discipline Priest. We played Void Weaver the whole time, but we started off with Discipline Priest, and we've decided to do a guide for each one of our Zero to Hero classes that we do. So Disc Priest is number 1, and let's just jump into it. Obviously, you can see Respect Oracle, standard setup here. Nothing too crazy about this, I would say. Just going down the tree. The Power Word Shield talents on the left. You get the crit talents as well with Inner Focus. Some people like to play Mindbender. I think having shorter CD on Shadow Fiend is just enough. There's also 1 point here with Blaze of Light that you can use with Pain and Suffering or just kind of move it around. But this is typically the setup you would use. And we should have that in the description below as well for anyone who's trying to figure out what talents we're using. Put our character link as well. And everything will be solved immediately. But I want to just keep this very, very simple. I feel like sometimes I don't want to say I overcomplicate some of the guys, but I want to just make sure this is extremely simple to understand the concept of Priest. And hopefully whenever people, watch the video, whenever people are done watching the video, they will have learned something. They'll have learned a little bit and they can, gain some knowledge from that without feeling overwhelmed. So I'm going to try to keep it very, very, very simple. Talk about opener, talk about our cooldowns, and yeah. Typically on Disc Priest, in our healer rotation video that we talked about this a bunch for every healer spec, but for Priest, it's pretty simple how you want to heal. You have Shield, Radiance, Penance, and that's pretty much what you're spamming throughout the game. So you're shielding on cooldown, you're pressing Shield on cooldown, you're pressing Penance, which also builds up your shield with Wheel and Woe. So every time you Penance, you get more shield buff. You press Shield, does more. Radiance as well is just kind of your burst heal that applies Atonement. And whenever you Radiance, you also get a stack of Harsh Discipline, which is a talent here that gives you extra Penance bolts, which, yet again, buffs your Penance, gives you more bolts, which after you get more bolts from your Penance, your shield is now larger. So pretty simple on Priest. A lot of it really comes down to you put up your dot. You can spread your dot with Penance as well. Casting Mind Blast is very good to do on cooldown if possible, or if you're locked out, because you get a buff to your Penance as well. You get a nice 30% buff to your next Penance. But so as far as offense goes, pretty simple what you're going to do consistently throughout a game. You just keep up your dot. You try to Mind Blast a lot. You try to Mind Blast as much as you can. Try to keep up Shadow Fiend, not only for mana regen, but more atonement healing as well. And when it comes to healing, same thing. You shield, you Penance, you have Radiance as well for a burst heal, and sometimes you'll get a proc heal, which is your Flash of Light. You'll get a Surge of Light proc, which you can use as well, and that's pretty much it. I feel like a lot of Priests, the rotation of it is quite simple. I think a lot of it really comes down to knowing how to rotate through the cooldowns. So as Priest, you have Pain Sup. So you have Pain Suppression. You have Evangelism now, which Evangelism replaced Rapture in the 2nd season. So Evangelism is basically just a huge heal on everyone that has Atonement. And it splits the heal evenly. And it extends Atonements as well. So Evangelism is a huge cooldown. It's a 90-second cooldown. Same CD Rapture was. And that is the replacement for Rapture. You have Pain Suppression, which of course is just a damage reduction, a huge damage reduction that you can add to your teammate. That lasts for 8 seconds. You can use it while you're stunned. So you have Power Word Barrier, which is a AoE spell. So it's an AoE barrier that you toss on the ground here. Everyone that stands in it gets a damage reduction. 3-minute cooldown. It lasts for 10 seconds. Then you have, of course, Life Swap. So you have Void Shift, which is just swapping HP that you have on. You should be playing that no matter what spec of Priest you're playing. Then you have Ultimate Penitance. Now, Ultimate Penitance, I wouldn't say is as big of a cooldown as it used to be. It used to be an automatic save. As soon as you flew up in the air with Ultimate Penitance, everyone is full HP. If you used it for damage, you're getting a huge amount of damage out, as well as Atonement healing. If you used it for healing, the second you fly up in the air, everyone is full HP. It's been nerfed a little bit since then. I think damage is really high, so it's not nearly as guaranteed of a save, I should say, as it used to be. But it is still a huge cooldown nonetheless for Priest that can help you recover, because it also gives you a CC immunity and gives you a huge shield when you fly up in the air to kind of help survive as well. So if you're getting attacked as well, or you're getting attacked, or you're getting rotted down by some .coms, whatever it is, you get a huge shield as well when you fly in the air, and then you obviously toss out healing to everyone else. So 5 major cooldowns on Priest. I will try to explain all of them. It's always going to be very situational what happens when you're playing in Arena. It's never just a set, okay, this guy's doing this, let me press my cooldown. Oh, we're dying, let me press this. Oh, this is happening, let me swap. It's never going to be set. The game is ever changing. It's always going to be situational. But hopefully after watching this, you'll have a better idea of when to press spells. So Evangelism is a huge heal on everyone that has Atonement up. I think a huge part of this, just being able to extend atonements as well, because when you extend atonements, you have your mastery that just increases your healing and absorption on people that have atonement. So being able to extend atonements is huge. And on top of that, it's a spell where you basically just press it whenever you want, and whoever has atonement up will get healed. So what's nice about it is you're able to actually cancel aura for this. So a lot of people have macros for this where if they have atonement on themselves, they can cancel their own atonement when they press Evangelism. So that Evangelism is only going before they press Evangelism. So that Evangelism is only going on their teammates. And by doing so, you're just increasing the healing that you're giving to your teammate, because it is split evenly amongst your team. So this cooldown is basically one that I think is used as more of a, I would say kind of a reset, kind of a burst heal that you have. So you want to use it often, but you don't want to obviously waste it if people are full HP. People are 90% health. You don't want to just press Evangelism. You don't need to. It's more of a burst heal than anything else, unless you are pairing it with the Archangel talent, which then gives Evangelism more healing and also increases your healing done for 15 seconds afterwards. So if you are playing it with Archangel, with the Honor talent, then you can definitely use it as more of a hard cooldown. But I think overall with Evangelism, it's good to use as kind of your burst heal. So even though you have Radiance is obviously not the biggest burst heal, especially if you're not getting any crits with it, or you're fighting very high DPS classes like Fury Warrior or Demon Hunter, dealing with sub rogues. It's not going to be the huge save that you want, and Evangelism kind of acts like that more, especially if you only have Atonement out on one person or 2 people. You have a massive heal that you can press on demand. So Evangelism, I would say, is definitely used more as a catch up and as a burst heal. And that's kind of how you want to use it. You want to just fill it into your rotation. Whenever you're kind of lacking healing, if you come out of CC, you have a huge burst heal. You can press Evangelism, boom, 5 million healing on your teammate, which, obviously helps you catch up a good amount. Moving on to Pain Suppression. I think Pain Suppression is pretty simple to understand for most people. It is just a damage reduction spell that you add to your teammates. So I think with Pain Suppression, it's one of those spells where, when you're in solo shuffle, it's definitely difficult to perfectly rotate through cooldowns. We all know that. If you're watching this and you're a healer, which, most likely you are, you're playing solo shuffle, we all know it's impossible to perfectly rotate through everything with your teammates in shuffle. In 2v2 and in 3v3, it's a bit different. Obviously, there's usually more communication there, but in shuffle, it's very difficult to try and perfectly rotate everything. But the best thing you can do, I think, with Pain Suppression is using your first one early. I think the first Pain Suppression charge is always good to use early. I think it's obviously important not to waste your spells. Let's say you get stunned, no one's doing anything yet, there's no cooldowns popped, no damage is going out, and you lob a Pain Suppression. Probably not ideal. But I think using your first one a bit more freely could help a lot of players when it comes to climbing rating and dealing with that initial burst and that initial opener from a lot of specs in the game right now. So typically when you're playing, it's important to kind of be ready to throw the first Pain Sup out. So let's say teams are running in, you're fighting Windwalker DK, you're fighting or let's say you're fighting a Mage Rogue, or you're fighting a Hunter team. You get stunned, they're attacking your teammate, they're pressing cooldowns. Lobbing your first Pain Sup is not the worst thing, because even if they swap to a different target, or you know, let's say they don't commit all of their damage, you're slowing the game down. And that's what is really, really important as a healer. And even for DPS, this happens as well. But I think a huge part of the game that people don't understand too well when they're trying to climb is the importance of extending the setup, or extending, or just giving your teammates time to react. So, you know, you get stunned by a hunter, they're about to trap you, they're pressing all their cooldowns and attacking your teammate. You press the pain sup. Perfectly fine. Gives him time to react, slows down the damage. And if they swap to a different target, then that person now, like I said, has time to kind of react to what's going on. And the person getting attacked as well that has the pain suppression on them, if they're committing damage to him, also has time to react, and just gives you a, you know, lower chance to get sort of cheesed in the opener, so to speak. So always good, I think, to press the first pain suppression early. The second one, you definitely should be a lot more careful with, especially if you are very, very far away from getting a third charge. You know, if you have 2 minutes left on your pain suppression and you have other cooldowns to press, or they have a cooldown to press, typically you want to try to have them press theirs so that you can rotate a little bit better. But usually the first pain suppression is not the worst to kind of toss out and help your team kind of recover or be a bit more calm during the madness. So barrier is similar to pain suppression, I would say, especially in a solo shuffle setting where it's good to sort of throw it out earlier in the game. It's a 3-minute cooldown, so when you are in shuffle, you typically don't get to a second one. You're only going to get one. And even though I think some people like to be a little bit more cautious with that, I think it's very important to note what classes you're fighting and when to trade either pain suppression or barrier on that initial opener. So typically barrier is good if you're fighting, you know, more melee cleaves. If you're fighting a lot of melee or classes that have a lot of pets or a lot of cleave where everyone can stack in the barrier and the enemy team is pressing all of their damage cooldowns, that's when barrier is a lot more useful than simply pressing pain suppression. A good example of this is Death Knight. So if you're fighting a Death Knight, you get death gripped into the blinding sleet, you get stunned, strangulated, all these things. They're pressing all their cooldowns. Everyone's slowly rotting down. If it's an Unholy Decay, everyone's got dots on them. Pets are attacking them. They're dying. The whole team is getting attacked. If it's a Frost Decay, the entire team is getting 100-0'd during that setup. So barrier is typically the cooldown that you would want to trade if you're able to in one of those, in that sort of setting, because you're not only giving damage reduction to just one person, you're obviously giving it to everyone. I think fighting against even caster comps, you can do this as well. So even if you end up getting a more of a caster lobby where it's a, you know, let's say it's a Frost Mage and a Destrolock. The Destrolock has Havoc on both DPS. The Mages has Orb down. Everyone's kind of stacked up. Lobbing a barrier there instead of pain supping one person is very, very helpful, because now, like I said, you have both teammates in the damage reduction and you're slowing the game down for both of them. Now, the flip side of this is when you barrier, especially in shuffle, there is a high chance that people will run out of it. So even though it's something that you can, you know, pretty clearly see, I think a lot of people get sort of distracted, or, you know, don't understand maybe the damage they're taking, and maybe they don't think they need it, whatever the case may be, and they run out of it. So don't come back here getting upset at me because I'm telling you to press barrier and, you know, they just run out of it. It happens. It's something that you really cannot control. Cannot control that, but barrier is a great cooldown nonetheless. Even if it's one person, let's say you're fighting a rogue where you can use barrier on the smoke bomb, that's a good use of barrier as well. But outside of those specific niche scenarios, I think using barrier when there is cleave damage going out and multiple targets are taking a lot of damage, so like our Warlock Frost Mage example, I think that is a good time to use barrier. So final cooldown for Priest. Life swap is pretty easy to understand. It's a cooldown that, you know, changes your HP. When you're in solo shuffle, especially, or even in threes this is the case, but when you're in solo shuffle especially, trying to hold this until the last second, or trying to hold this till later in the game, later in the round when dampening is higher, is extremely, extremely good to do, because Void Shift is not affected by dampening because you're swapping HP, similar to the Spirit Link and Tempered in Battle from Holy Paladin. So if you are full HP, and let's say it's 50, 60, 65% dampening in your solo shuffle round, and you still have life swap available, if you swap your target and this is your last cooldown to press, you are giving them full HP. You, of course, will drop down to 25%, but you're giving them a full health bar. And this is something that you'll notice a lot with Priest, where if they have Void Shift as that final cooldown to trade, sometimes you can squeeze out a few more wins, or, you know, you'll squeeze out an extra win in a lobby compared to if you're using Void Shift early on in the round, and then you eventually get to a point where dampening is too high and you can't really catch up. So Void Shift, I think, pretty easy to understand. You change HP. Good to use later on in the game in Shuffle. In 3s or 2s, it's kind of a cooldown that, because it is off of GCD, it's off the global cooldown, it's also very nice to have as kind of the oh crap button, where, you know, let's say you're mid global and you're able to just press swap. So, you know, you're jumping around, use the global, you can still press swap and get that button off without being stuck. And sometimes you have those situations where burst is too high, you have those panic situations, if you will, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with using the paints up there, but trying to hold that cooldown for later in the game is usually very, very, very beneficial for players, especially in solo shuffle. In 3v3, sometimes it's a little bit different, because if you Void Shift early, depending on how long your matchup is, it could go on and you can maybe get a second one. So sometimes we'll see that in AWC. We'll see that in the tournaments where Priest will use swap early, but trying to save that for a sort of last minute push or last minute save is very, 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 very crucial for a lot of those rounds that you get in Shuffle that feel like, you know, you barely got out of there with a win. And that's where kind of Void Shift kind of comes in handy. Final cooldown, Ultimate Penitance. So Ultimate Penitance, we talked about, it is you fly in the air, you launch a bunch of penance bolts out. Very simple to understand. If you are targeting an enemy, you will cast damage penances. You will cast, you know, enemy penances unless there are no enemies in your line of sight after you cast it, and then you will cast healing penances. So if you target an enemy and you get the cast off, the cast is completed, you fly up in the air, you're casting damage bolts. If you have 0 enemies in your line, it'll change to healing penances. And healing penances, I believe, even if you're full HP, I could be wrong on this, even if you're full HP, it'll still use healing. So if you're targeting an ally and you press Ultimate Penitence, it'll put you up in the air. It'll lob out as many healing penances as you can within 5-6 seconds. I think this cooldown is still very good. It's something that you don't want to try and rely on heavily compared to last season. It is not nearly as much healing as it used to be. So it used to be this immediate save. The second you flew in the air, everyone's full HP. Even if they have cooldowns pressed, your team can't really die. Now, because I believe the healing is a little less and damage is also very high, it's not the ultimate save like it used to be, despite being named Ultimate Penitence. So this cooldown, I would say, is one of those that, for the most part, I think using this as sort of a filler throughout other cooldowns is very useful. So let's say you run out of healing. Maybe you don't have Radiance charges. Maybe you don't have Penance Sub. You don't have a shield. Damage is really high. You already use Pain Sub. Maybe you're about to be CC'd, which is a perfect time to use it. Maybe you think you're going to be CC'd really soon. You're about to get hit with a crowd control, whether a stun, fear, whatever it is. Casting that Ultimate Penitence early, you fly in the air, you're immune to CC, and now you're lobbing out healing, and you have extra time to react. Because the nice thing that they did with Ultimate Penitence too is they made it so you can move around with it. So whenever you fly in the air, you can actually move around, sort of like the Terminator or Michael Myers, if you will. Kind of glide around that way and reposition slightly. You know, you can't get across the map with it, but you can reposition with your Ultimate Penitence. So I think this is a cooldown that you can use as sort of a filler, or, you know, maybe a cooldown that you can use to negate CC. If you feel like you're about to be hit with crowd control, you can use Ultimate Penitence. If you feel like you just need a little bit more healing, you know, you need a little bit more HPS during a setup, or maybe you ran out of charges for Radiance, or you don't have shield up and you need extra healing, you could do it that way. But that's kind of the cooldown that it is now. It's more of a filler spell, I would say, or a spell used to avoid CC, rather than, or a spell even to, you know, prevent you from dying, because you do get a huge shield that is the amount of your full health, as the amount of your max HP whenever you cast Ultimate Penitence. So it can also be used to survive and as sort of a defensive cooldown for yourself. But that's kind of how you use Ultimate Penitence, I would say. It's not really the greatest save like it used to be, but once again, when it comes to Discipline Priest, if you're able to rotate these cooldowns effectively, you will have far greater success than other priests, especially, you know, mid to lower rating, that are sort of using their cooldowns very freely. So you'll notice that a lot of times you're fighting Discipline Priests, you know, let's say you're 1700, 1800, you'll see a lot of priests that, you know, 2K raid, you'll see a lot of priests that they'll paint up immediately. And then maybe people are still dying a few seconds later, they'll press barrier. And then maybe, you know, 40 seconds later, they'll press another paint up, and now they have nothing. They have no paint suppression. They have no paint suppressions left. They have no barrier, and they've used all of it within 40 seconds. So if you're able to kind of extend that, where you're using a paint suppression, maybe damage is too high, you Evangelism. You know, the next setup, you can use a barrier. Maybe before the setup after that, you can Ultimate Penitence to avoid CC. You know, then you can maybe use another paint up, or maybe Evangelism's off cooldown. And if you're able to sort of rotate throughout those spells and cycle through them, you will have a much, much more pleasant experience as a healer compared to the usual healer experience, which a lot of us know, where it feels like you're sort of being ran over and ran down and you don't have any answers. And I can assure you, especially if you are, you know, let's say you're 1750 struggling to get 1800, you're 2K rated struggling to get 2100, I guarantee you that that is not the case. And there is usually something that you can do, whether it's having a cleaner rotation healing wise, whether it's being able to get better CC, whether it's cycling your cooldowns better. There's something you can do to kind of help your teammates more, help yourself, and grind to that next benchmark of rating. So Discipline Priest, once again, very cooldown based, very, very cooldown based. Cycling through that is extremely important. And once you can get sort of used to that, or you have, let's say, 5 or 6 trades with your cooldowns throughout a couple minutes, you will have lots of success. Another thing I want to talk about, which is not, we won't have too much time. We won't need too much time to discuss this, but positioning on Priest. I think when you're playing Discipline Priest, depending on what you're playing with, a lot of the time you will try to stay by a pillar. So a lot of the time on Priest, unless you're playing with, you know, a hunter maybe, where you want to get a fear off of the traps, or you're playing with a mage and you want to get fears off of the sheeps, it's really important on Priest to kind of stay in a position where you are, you know, being able to weave in and out of the pillar. So weaving in and out of the pillar is really, really important when you have Penance, because you can cast it while moving. So being able to go sort of weave in and out of line of sight, get a Penance out, maybe put up your dot, go back out of line, and have the enemy not have immediate access to your line of sight and be able to CC you freely will help a ton. And it'll give you a lot more time to, you know, death CC, fade CC if you're playing phase shift, you know, ultimate penitence CC as well. You can use that if you're sort of in a better position where they kind of have to charge towards you. But typically being away from the enemy while also being in line of your teammates at a pillar and weaving in and out with penance is huge for priests. I think another thing too that's important is when it comes to your CC, on Discipline Priest you have fear. So sometimes you can mind control, but for the most part using fear effectively is important. I think using fear, unless you're trying to follow up on CC with the healer, I think using fear on a DPS is very, very useful as well. So let's say you're sitting at the pillar, you're weaving in and out, you have a mage or a hunter trying to CC you. You know, you can use Shadow Word Death to avoid it and delay it. You can use Fade to avoid it. And then you have Fear. So, you know, let's say a hunter's running up to try and trap you. You're at the pillar. You have Shadow Word Death. Maybe he tries to fake the Shadow Word Death, doesn't press trap. Maybe you have Fade after that. If you want to fade the trap, he still doesn't press it. And then at this point, you've already used 2 of your spells to avoid CC. The next one to use is a Fear. You can Fear and then try to create distance off of that. And I think unless you're playing with, you know, classes like Mage or Hunter, or maybe you need to get CC on the healer, I think using Fear on the DPS or using Fear to sort of peel or, you know, slow down the CC or slow down the game is very, very useful as well. You don't want to be the priest that is not pressing Fear for multiple minutes at a time where you're just not getting any crowd control off. Because even if, and you may think, oh, well, what if they just dispel it, or what if it breaks? Even if that's the case, which sometimes that does happen, typically if you can fear or use your crowd control, even if it takes them a second or two to dispel it, even if it breaks a little later, even if you force a trinket and they get out of it anyways and you still get trapped, you're still changing the game and you're still allowing for different openings. You know, let's say that situation we talked about with the hunter, you fear him, he trinkets, boom. Now he sits the next CC, or now he's a target for, you know, getting swapped to, or he's an opening. If he doesn't have a trinket, you can stun him, maybe in a bad position and kill him, or you can use your fear, and now if the healer is CC'd or the healer can't dispel it, the hunter is stuck. So it may not seem like it's doing much to pressure fear if it's breaking pretty quickly or if they're getting dispelled fast, but you're making the other players have to make decisions based on that. So you're either slowing the game down, which is good, or you're making the other player have to kind of make a decision on if they want to trinket, if they're going to get dispelled by the healer. And those are very, very important for kind of creating and building momentum in arena. Now, when I say that, please don't go and just fear the DPS without any crowd control and nothing's going on and you're just fearing DPS and they dispel it. Try not to do that. Try not to do that. It's very easy to do. You know, it's very easy to kind of get into this habit of, oh, I'm going to fear on cooldown, and then you don't really get anything out of it. Try to not do that where you don't have any CC or there's no pressure going out and it's just getting dispelled immediately. But you have to make sure to not just go multiple minutes without pressing fear. So if you have a 2.5 minute, 3 minute shuffle round and you press fear 0 times, that's a problem. If you press it 1 time, still kind of a problem. So you want to make sure that you're still still consistently using that spell. And I think as far as Disc Priest goes, I hope I took so long with this once again, 36 minutes, my goodness. It's pretty simple on Disc. A lot of it is being very efficient with your rotation, your cooldown trading, and keeping up your dot, trying to mind blast often. That's majority of what you're doing on Discipline Priest. There aren't any crazy things you can really do outside of good mind controls. There aren't any crazy or complex things that are going on with your rotation or tons of buffs to manage. A lot of it really comes down to just being very, very efficient with your healing and cycling through your defensive cooldowns with Pain Suppression, with Barrier, with Life Swap or Void Shift. Before we end this, we'll try to go over Premonition super quickly, and then we'll leave it at that. I don't want anyone to be overwhelmed or feel like this is too much information. I really do want to just keep this simple. So we're going to try to go over the use of Premonition really quick in the Oracle tree, and that'll be it. So typically, when you're on Priest, you know, the gates open. The first thing you want to do is get up a shield or put up renews on people for the atonement. So the gates open, you target your main teammate, you put up a shield, you can renew yourself or renew your other teammate. And then what's nice to do, especially if you're fighting, you know, classes that are in stealth maybe, or, you know, maybe they're kind of waiting back at the pillar, being able to put up a shield and then being able to penance early so that your next shield, because you'll have wheel and woe stacks, so that your next shield is even bigger. I think that's very important for the opener as well. So typically the opener, you'll shield, and then if you have time and, you know, the enemy is still across the map, or maybe it's stealth, maybe there are stealth classes out, penancing early so that you can build up wheel and woe stacks helps a ton. So your next shield is basically double the strength, and, you know, you just have more efficiency there. So that's kind of the standard opener for Priest. Nothing too crazy. You just want to make sure you have atonement up and that you have a shield on your main target. When it comes to Premonition, there are a few ways you can use this. Some people have used this to give yourself extra cooldown reduction on your cooldowns. So in Shuffle, people sometimes will use it on your power infusion, so you get 10 seconds off if you are playing the Fate Bender talent, which gives you 40% more on the effect of it. So that first CD, the Premonition of Insight, some people will do that in Solo Shuffle, or even in 3v3 they'll do that so that they have a shorter cooldown. I think the best way to use Insight, however, would be for Shield and Penance. I think getting a shorter cooldown on your Penance is massive. You know, being able to basically have, whenever you penance and you shield, whenever you Premonition of Insight and you either power word shield or you penance, you have 0 cooldown on those spells for the next 3 presses. So if you Premonition of Insight and you press shield, there's no cooldown. Then you can press penance, there's no cooldown again. And then maybe you can shield a different teammate after that, or shield the same teammate if the shield's already broken. But being used on penances and potentially shields is the best way to use it. It kind of gives you more fluidity in your rotation, and obviously gives you a ton of HPS that way. Premonition of Piety, I would say, is used as, once again, another HPS increase. So I would say with the second Premonition with Piety, I think it's very important to use for just overall HPS. I think, you know, damage is extremely high. Let's say you already used the pain suppression. If you have Piety up, you have extra healing that way because it gives you 28%. Then it also gives you it gives you 98% of overhealing that's redistributed to your team. So if you have Piety up for, you know, 10 seconds, 12 seconds, whatever it is, let's see, 15 seconds, and you have atonements on each person, you have a radiance out. That radiance that you do, not only will it be increased by 28%, but it also, if you have any overhealing, will redistribute that. If you use Evangelism during Piety, you also have another massive buff because you have a 28% buffed Evangelism, as well as the massive healing that you get from the overhealing that it most likely will do. So I think Piety is, once again, a spell that you can use for just HPS increase. HPS increase that you can also pair with your other cooldowns, or you can simply use that for your general rotation. But using it with Evangelism, or even using it with an ultimate Penitance where you use Piety, you defensive ultimate Penitence so that you only use healing penance bolts, and now everyone is full HP, and it makes that cooldown even stronger. The third one, Premonition of Solace, I would say just another damage reduction. You can treat this similar to Pain Sup, or you have yet again on Priest another cooldown to trade, where, you know, sometimes you'll have to, because it has been nerfed multiple times, sometimes you have to use a Pain Suppression or a cooldown anyways, even though you press Premonition of Solace. But whenever you have Solace up, it's another trade, so to speak. It's another cooldown that you have that you can use as another trade, or just that extra cooldown in your cycle with your Pain Suppression and your barrier. You don't want to rely on it too much because it, like I said, it is nerfed, but that is yet again another spell on Priest that can sort of be used as a cooldown, where you give your teammate a huge shield with that Premonition of Solace, and you give them a small amount of damage reduction while the shield exists. It's not the biggest shield anymore. I think in combat it's about 2 million or so, but it is still another small cooldown that you can use to rotate through. The final Premonition is Premonition of Clairvoyance, which simply gives you all 3 of the premonitions that you just used. And this is the same. I think Premonition of Clairvoyance is typically used the way Solace is. I think it's a spell that you kind of use for, you know, another trade, if you will. I don't think it's a spell like Insight, where Insight you can kind of use a bit more freely. I think Clairvoyance and Solace are different, where you obviously want to use them as sort of a trade and a sort of a cooldown trade when things are getting hectic throughout the game. So Clairvoyance, you get all 3. You get Insight, you get Piety, and you get Solace. I think this is more of a trading premonition to use and a cooldown, rather than Insight and even Piety, where you can kind of use them a lot more freely. And that's pretty much it. I think that Disc Priest is one of the more simpler healers to learn. It's something that I think is a lot of fun, and I feel like it's very straightforward. And the issue with Priest for a lot of people is this idea of having to be more efficient. So it's hard when you have, I would say it's hard for people to understand, you know, if you have something simple like Disc with where you have, you know, you have a couple healing spells and you have a few cooldowns to press. I think it's hard for people to play those classes sometimes and feel like they're stuck, or feel like they're hitting a brick wall in terms of their skill and their gameplay, and not understand why, or like maybe they think they're doing something crazy wrong with their rotation. When typically, sometimes this is the case, but typically for healers like Disc, I think a lot of it comes down to players just over trading cooldowns and using things too freely. So efficiency is key. Being able to build up shields with Penance, being able to build up penances with Radiance, being able to rotate through your Premonitions for HPS gain or the cooldown trade with Solace or Clairvoyance, while, you know, rotating and cycling through your Pain Sub. Then you press Barrier. You have Void Shift as well as an extra safety net. And it's all about efficiency with those spells. Whereas I feel like other healers, there are definitely ways to... There's a bit more complexity to it sometimes. You know, with the Resto Druid, it's similar where maybe you're putting up your HOTS wrong, or maybe you're using maybe you are healing wrong, or maybe you are not getting enough CC, or maybe you're wasting your Ironbark sometimes, and that's your major cooldown, right? Shaman, maybe you're missing kicks or you're not using grounding enough. I feel like Priest is a lot about efficiency, and once you can feel very comfortable with your healing, feel comfortable with cycling through your cooldowns where you basically have an answer for every situation in a 3-minute, 4-minute shuffle, or 3-minute, 4-minute game, 2-minute, 3-minute shuffle round. Once you can be a lot more comfortable with that and have that sort of, and focus on that efficiency, you'll notice that you'll be a lot more successful. I feel like I went over everything pretty well and tried to make it simple. So hopefully it works. Hopefully everyone enjoys this, and I will try to finish the Monk and Druid soon. We have to do it for every healer, and thank you.